I wanted to start off just talking a bit about the Observer Hall of Fame because the issue came out today announcing the inductees into this year's class who got the requisite 60% of the votes in their region. So to start off this year, Mystico was in the Mexico region, getting 76%. Kota Ibushi getting in this year, which is interesting because he missed the mark last year. And in the past year, he didn't wrestle one match, but got over the threshold by a decent amount here to get in, as well as Tetsuya Naito, who got one less vote than Ibushi, but the same percentage. Los Villanos on the ballot this year, they were inducted, as well as Rollerball Mark Rocco from the UK European region, as well. Not voted in, but added were promoters Lou Darrow and Johnny Doyle. So quite a lot of inductees this year. But first of all, wait, just about Ibushi, Naito, and this year, I'll go through my ballot at the end of this. I voted for both Ibushi and Naito. I don't vote in the Mexico region nor the European region. I just feel I don't have the depth of knowledge on all the different candidates, so I abstain. But for the Japanese category, I did vote for Ibushi and Naito this year. And Ibushi was Naito. I have kind of I've been slow on him on a number of years, but I feel over the totality, and I'll tell you, being in Japan when we went, and that weekend, so much of it being about Naito and seeing the coverage he got, the merchandise, like that to me was very impactful to actually see like the juggernaut that LIJ is in Japan, which is what you have always heard about their merchandise. But being there, that definitely played an effect on me and on Naito and seeing the impact a couple of years ago.
Certainly, yeah. I think, in my time really watching New Japan closely, like he really has felt like, if not number one, then certainly at least number two in the company as far as like, local baby faces goes. Like a couple more than one Wrestle Kingdom was like, featuring him as sort of like the focal point with him chasing Okada's championship. So as far as like, being a draw goes, I don't really see that much of an argument not to put him in. I think Kota Ibushi maybe in those terms might be a bit of a bigger question, because how big of a run has he actually had at the top? What are arguments against him joining, and why do you think he ultimately got in?
I think for him, I mean, to me, he is among the most spectacular wrestlers I have seen in my entire time watching pro wrestling. Like, I think that when him and Kenny Omega did the Budokan Hall show 10 years ago, I mean, that was a very big match. He has come over to New Japan and was put into a very prominent role. And I think when you take the classics that he has been a part of, like, certainly it's his in-ring that to me is very influential, and what he did in DDT and becoming a top guy, like a legitimate top guy in New Japan. I think at that point it was, this is one of the most spectacular careers when you truly look at it. He has not had the sustained long run on top in New Japan, but to me it's still somebody that has had great influence on their business and what he did before New Japan as well, that you put into it as well. So okay. I feel he was always like the borderline, and maybe it was somewhat of this year that there seems to be a reluctance on a lot of people to vote those in that are still active performers. But in the case of Naito and Ibushi, you're certainly looking at them in terms of like their closing years in the industry. And with Ibushi, like, I think everyone expects, he will eventually come back, but he's 40 now. And I think having a year off, people maybe were looking at, he's on finally on sort of that downside of a guy who has really defied his age, that certainly doesn't look it. But being out this long, maybe it was enough for some people to reflect and realize this guy is a Hall of Famer. Ones that came very close but didn't make the mark included Argentina Rocca and Miguel Perez. Of course, a number of tag teams were placed on the ballot this year, some of which one side is already in on their own. But in the case of like a Dynamite Kid, he's on again with Davey Boy Smith. Kawada is now paired with Akira Taue, but none of those tag teams made it in. Sergeant Slaughter was at 57%, but some of the more interesting candidates, CM Punk, he was up from 33% this year and got 41%, so still 19% off from inclusion. I voted for CM Punk. I think he's a Hall of Famer, and he was up from the year prior, but I certainly feel that this exit from AEW, or at least his last public appearance on behalf of AEW, probably hurt in some way. But I don't know how you don't look at Punk and the totality of his AEW run as, to me, I was already pretty sold on CM Punk. And when he came in and sold out the United Center just for the tease of his appearance, sold out the building, and you add all of what they did this year, how he has raised the floor of AEW's pay-per-view business. Like, there are more AEW fans buying pay-per-views now, and I think he's a huge contributing factor. But not enough for inclusion.
If voting closed August of 2022, do you think he gets in?
Well, last year, the voting ended somewhere around October. So you still had the introduction of Punk, and he didn't get in. He only got 33% last year, and that's with the whole comeback and that pay-per-view that he did with Darby Allin. So you're asking this year if it had ended in August, right?
Mm-hmm. Before All Out, basically.
Yeah, I don't think it's enough that 19% would be enough that he would have made it in. It's possible. It's still a big gap. It's not like he's, within shooting distance. Like, it's a sizable amount he still needs to gain. And maybe one day he'll get there, but I just look at this guy's career, and I think the hardest area for inclusion is modern day performers, especially that are North American based. And, when it comes to historical candidates, if you didn't live through those eras, I think you can tend to focus on their positives and all of their big crowning achievements, as opposed to week in, week out, seeing that person, and sort of, you're not assessing the legend of this person, but you are seeing them in real time. And I think that's one of the arguments in favor of voting for those you've kind of lived through. But, for a Punk, I think a Roman Reigns is another person who should be in the Hall of Fame, but I think, again, it comes to that like modern day sort of, I think, great scrutiny that modern day performers receive to a degree, especially North American based ones. But Punk was one of the more interesting ones going in here. Roman Reigns got 31%, so nowhere close. I feel in time that will change. And what are some other ones here? Ones that got less than 10%, so they're off next year, included the Rockers, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. Of course, Shawn's already in. What do you think about these tag teams, Way? Like, for someone like a Shawn Michaels, he's already in, and then they've added Michaels and Jannetty together. Do you like this?
Like the concept of like somebody being able to go in as a tag team separately from as a single tag?
Yeah, the idea that Jannetty would never get in on his own, but paired with Michaels, well, he didn't get enough here to even stay on the ballot. But that's the basic premise of a lot of these teams. Like Rock and Perez, Rocca was a huge star, and Perez is somebody that, he drew on top because he teamed with Rocca.
Or the Holy Demon Army in this case.
Yeah,
right?
which I voted for Taue on his own. So I had no problem voting for them again this year together.
Yeah, wrestling, it's one of those very strange things about pro wrestling where I think your identity as a duo or as a separate entity or it's very similar to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, isn't it? Where you can go in as part of a band, and you can also go in as a solo artist. I think it's fair. Because there are tag teams that are strictly known as tag teams. And if they have an ability to be able to get inducted, why would you disqualify, somebody who has a successful solo career or singles career on top of it as well? It's just one of those things I think we have to accept, with this art form.
Next year, ones who were dropped from the ballot, they didn't get enough votes to stay on, included Rocky Johnson and Enrique Torres. And Next year, Big Daddy, Kendo Nagasaki, Jackie Paulo, and Sergeant Slaughter all have to get at least 50% to stay on the ballot. But added to next year's ballot, we've got the beauty pair of Jackie Sato and Mak Fumiake, and Seth Rollins, John Moxley, and the one I am most excited for. The countdown starts now. Added to the ballot next year, the Young Bucks.
Very interesting. All the contemporary ones, I mean, are probably the most interesting.
Imagine if the Bucks and Punk get in next year.
When are we gonna get like real acceptance speeches and like an award ceremony for these Observer Awards?
Someone should do one. Someone should do it.
Well, I mean, it should be Dave. It should be the Observer that actually puts it on. But
did you see?
I don't know.
Did you see Ariel Helwani's acceptance speech at the World MMA Awards?
I have not. His 13th win for
13th win in a row.
Congratulations. I mean, at this point, really,
what a week this guy.
They should just name the award I mean, they will probably eventually on his behalf.
He gets up there on the stage, and his first thing is, "Not too bad for a content creator, huh?"
Oh God, why even give that dude that air? But that's
the most attention, like, I feel is going into this pay-per-view is this Paddy Pimblett thing. Like, it's remarkable, like, how much attention that Ariel Helwani commands in these kind of situations. But just going over my ballot real quick, and then we'll move on to the other news. So the areas I voted on in the historical category, I did vote for Rocca and Miguel Perez. And this past year, I did like a lot of research into like the history of New York, like going back to the 40s and 50s. And the argument is that, Rocca is a clear-cut Hall of Famer. And Miguel Perez what we're discussing here. Miguel Perez on his own is not getting in. But this was, to me, a tag team that they drew for so long on top at Madison Square Garden in the Northeast. And it's like, I can't look at all of these like sellouts that they drew and take credit away from Perez. Like, he was there. And it was for such a prolonged period that I can't just put all of it on Rocca. Like, there is a certain novelty, but if it's that sustainable in that level of a market, that to me, just in the research I did, I felt that Rocca and Perez get the nod. Dave looks at them as like a slam dunk Hall of Fame team. I don't look at them as slam dunk. I understand the arguments against it, but they were a team that ultimately got my vote. I voted for Johnny Rougeau as well. He is somebody that I think kind of is handicapped by so many assume that he was just strictly Montreal based. And the fact is, especially with the research of Pat LaPrade, I mean, he has uncovered so much about like Johnny Rougeau and not just the big audiences he drew and as a promoter, as a wrestler, but he traveled a lot. He went to many different territories and did well. He was not just some, big fish in a small pond, and Montreal was hardly a small pond. Like, this guy went to many different areas, and I think he's there. The unfortunate part of the historical candidates is that as the years go by, these names just kind of fade, and there's just less known about them. That it's, if you're not focused upon, if you're not relatable to a modern audience, it's sometimes very tough to get that kind of traction. And that takes me to my last candidate in the historical category. That's the Von Brauners and Sal Wangeroff, which are a team I voted on for every year since I did like a lot of studying on them, like a pretty preeminent top heel group that went to a lot of different territories, and they were just like the big heels of the day with a mouthpiece in Saul Wangeroff. But they are down to 10%. So I think I have to realize that they are not getting into the Hall of Fame, and you kind of have to look at your vote of, I believe that they would be included, but the consensus is they are not. And I would say as the years go on, they're probably going to fall off the ballot. Modern performers, as I said, I voted for CM Punk, I voted for Roman Reigns, and I voted for Sergeant Slaughter. Slaughter, just when we were doing that show from 1983, and Slaughter, like when you look at Slaughter and who he drew with over those years at Madison Square Garden, coming in, working with Bob Backlund, with Pat Patterson, just with a variety of different opponents, and then having where he was basically the number 2 babyface behind Hulk Hogan before he left. And if he stays during that explosion of the national expansion, Slaughter is at worst number 3 on the babyface list, but he left, and you can't give someone credit for not being somewhere, even if you believe it would have been successful. But went to the AWA. Of course, he had the time in Jim Crockett Promotions as a very effective drawing tag team with Don Kernodle, and was essentially one of the key pieces in what became Starrcade with the final conflict in that year in 1983 as well. So those are my 3 there. In Japan, I voted for Shima, Kota Ibushi, Tomohiro Ishii, Tetsuya Naito, and Akira Taue and Toshiaki Kawada. So of those 2, it was Ibushi and Naito getting in. Ishii, I just feel like he has just crossed a level to me that this is one of the all-time great wrestlers that 50 years from now, if I make it 50 years from now, I feel I will remember Tomohiro Ishii when I look back on 50 years of wrestling. And then in the non-wrestler category, Dave Brown, legendary Memphis announcer alongside Lance Russell. I think if Russell's in, Dave Brown should be in, just a top quality performer in his role. Bobby Bruns, very, very instrumental when it comes to the architecture of what was the foundation of Japanese wrestling. Morris Siegel, very famous Houston promoter, referee Joe Higuchi, and the last one was manager Bobby Davis, which I learned a ton from reading Tim Hornbacker's book on Buddy Rogers. Just, a manager that turned out to influence a ton of people and was somebody very, very key when it came to Buddy Rogers and in the Northeast and Midwest, where he was predominantly based out of. So that was my ballot for 2022. A couple got in and many did not that I voted for. So